Welcome back, everybody. Hope everybody had a fantastic New Year's. We are again back with a great new guest today. We will talk about biggest party in sport, Caribbean Premier League, and we are joined by Peter Miller, who is head of PR and communications for Caribbean Premier League. We will discuss today the role of franchisee cricket in Caribbean region, how cricketers are benefiting out of it, and impact of CPL T20. Right. So, Peter, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks for inviting me. It's always nice to talk about cricket. It's what I spend my life doing, and dream job, all the rest of it.
Excellent, excellent, great. So, why don't we get started with a question which I'm curious about. How did you land in this job in Caribbean, and talk to us about what is the job all about? Demystify this role for us.
So I'd been doing bits and pieces for the Caribbean Premier League since about 2015. I got approached by a PR agency they were using at the time who said, "Can you write some match reports for us?" So I was offered the opportunity to watch all of the CPL, and I was like, "Well, great! I love cricket, like T20, fantastic." So I did that I think I'm at, no, 2014 was when I started. So I did it in 2014, 2015, 2016. 2015, they invited me out to go and interview some cricketers, which was amazing. I was walking around in hotels and they were like, "Who would you like to talk to today?" And I would just go down the squad list and be like, Jack Callis, Shahid Afridi, Chris Gayle, Darren Sammy. And they're like, "Yeah, cool. Okay, meet us in the lobby at this time." And as a cricket journalist, you're there going, "Well, this is great." I mean, it's just very different from what you normally have to go through to get access to names like that. Then 2016, they again invited me out. I went out to their draft, did some more coverage then. And then it's kind of a roundabout way how this job ended up happening. A digital agency approached me saying, "Look, we know about about the CPL. Would you come on board to work with us over the tournament? Because the CPL have engaged us to do some digital stuff." And I was like, "Yeah, okay." And I went to a meeting with them. And after the meeting, the big bosses there said, "Look, the guy who was doing this job's left. Would you be interested in doing it?" And obviously I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." So that was 2017. So I've done 4 CPLs as the head of PR now. And I'm still going. So hopefully, fingers crossed, I'm doing something right. But I mean, it's just, it's unlike any other cricket you've ever gone to. It's just crazy. That whole, it's not often that a tagline really fits something, but when you've got a full CPL stadium, it is the biggest party in sport. People in the Caribbean are so much fun to be around. They're so welcoming. Getting to travel around the Caribbean and go to these different cricket stadiums, stadiums that you've fallen in love with watching as a kid, Queen's Park Oval, Sabina Park, Kensington Oval, all those places is just amazing. And then to just be able to have free reign and be working there is fantastic. So, and then you wanted to know what the job involved.
Yep.
Well, the CPL team's quite small, so it's kind of, we have a relatively small marketing team of which I'm the part. It's run by a guy called Chris Watson, who is just one of the most switched on guys you could ever meet. And then we have 2 guys that run our social media and digital stuff, Vishnu Kumar and Kevin Dempsey. And then there's a guy who looks after our video production stuff called Paul Pritchett Brown. So I work with them, but primarily my role is kind of drafting and sending out press releases, planning how we're going to announce stuff. So kind of the way CPL tends to start is we'll start off the year talking about some of the successes we had from the previous year. So whether that's sponsorship deals or TV coverage and all the rest of it. So December, January, we do that. And then we start building up towards the draft. So traditionally the draft's been May time. It kind of tends to move depending on what other stuff is going on. So we've got to factor in when the IPL is going to be on, et cetera, et cetera. You've got to try and find the right spot to be doing stuff. And in a crowded cricket schedule, that's actually more difficult than you would think. We spend a lot of time talking about when we're going to release stuff, and then when the tournament's actually on, it's my job to make sure that the press boxes run okay, that we have press conferences. I deal with interview requests, etc., etc. So yeah, every bit of communication that comes out of the CPL to the press comes through me. Yeah, so that's the job. It's fantastic. I mean, there's so much freedom with it. Yeah, it's great. I mean, it literally is my dream job. I'm delighted to get to do it every day.
So that role is going to be critical in likes of how 2020 panned out, right? Because CPL was the first T20 franchise tournament to go live into in 2020, and it was probably the precursor for IPL, which was leading up. How difficult or how different was it, and importance of communication or your role in 2020? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of been talked of a lot, hasn't it, in terms of what that bubble is like. And it's tough. There's no getting away from it. You know, everyone's shut down and doesn't get to do stuff. But normally you're shut down with your family. You've got your creature comforts. You're in your own house. So CPL this year was just really, really different. We went through Barbados and had a couple of days in the hotel in Barbados. And then we arrived in Trinidad and we had 8.5 days of being locked in our rooms and unable to leave our rooms. And the only human interaction you either have is over Zoom calls with people 2 rooms down from you, which is a very strange situation to be in, or one of the medical staff who were there coming and taking your temperature twice a day. So it was, yeah, it's a very, very bizarre experience. Yeah, and I think, you know, in a way, it was kind of easier in terms of the moving parts for me, because normally I'll be sorting out interviews in the 2 weeks leading up to the tournaments. Guys are traveling, they're training, they've got this sponsor appearance, that sponsor appearance. I'm there and I'm saying, is there any way you guys could spare some time with Ross Taylor? And Ross Taylor's going, please, I'm bored out my mind. I'm sat in this room and I've got nothing to do. So in a way, kind of made it easier. And then in terms of press conferences, obviously we moved all of those online and I got guys to send the questions in and then I just asked the questions, tried to do it via Zoom, but it was tricky with hotel Wi-Fi, which can just be patchy. And after we tried it a couple of times, it just didn't work. So then what I could do is I could ask the questions and then upload those videos and then guys would have the videos. So, you know, as tough as it was being stuck in a hotel for 7 weeks, it was a very nice hotel. I had all of my meals paid for while I was there. I was being paid to do it. And it kind of, you know, because normally CPL, so one of those tournaments that if you think we've got 2 legs that are going on at the moment at any one time, and we go across 6 different countries, these aren't different states. They're literally, you're going through a different international border. So you're there in, you know, you'll be there going, right, okay, it'd be really great if we did this bit of content with that player. And then you realize actually they left 3 hours ago to get a plane to go to the other country where there's games. So the logistics of doing the job was slightly easier. I mean, there was when we were doing all of the rounds of testing this year, in terms of just trying to work out who had, we. So sorry, I'm going on a bit here, but it's quite complicated. 2020. Hopefully, this is interesting. The 2020 season worked is everyone had to have a PCR test when they left. And they had a PCR test again when they arrived in Trinidad. And then they had one again after 7 days. And they had one again after 14 days. Then we had one again after another 2 weeks. And then we had one again before we left. So it was, I think all told, the minimum number of PCR tests you would have would be 7 throughout that time. So it's kind of like a bit nerve-wracking, I felt, as the PR person, as I'm waiting for the doctors to tell me whether or not anybody's tested positive, right? So that was... And then we were very fortunate, and the protocols that were put in place. So the guy that runs the operations of CPL is a guy called Michael Hall from Jamaica. And he put together some amazing protocols that meant that in conjunction with the medical team, there was 3 doctors that were in consultation with CPL, along with the health boards in Barbados, St. Lucia, and Trinidad. So between them, they put in these protocols that if we followed them, we should all be fine, right? But we still just needed to be quite careful. So, I mean, I think that was probably the only time where I was like, oh God, I really hope no one has it, because that puts the whole thing in jeopardy, right? But luckily enough, that didn't happen, and we were able to have a really successful tournament that was watched by 500 million people. So
it's great, and particularly fascinating and impressive piece of work because, like I said, I think CPL was the first franchisee tournament in 2020 to pull this off. So there must have been a lot of lessons learned. Right now, if you fast forward into India Tour of Australia, of course, everybody has an opinion about everything going on, but they are much more better placed because some of the teams and tournaments have gone through the process, and now there is an easier way to manage the protocol.
yeah,
So,
there's slightly fewer moving parts in a bilateral series, right? So you've got, you're able to basically have the guys who are already there that come into the bubble, and then you can organize one jet from one country to bring everybody in. Whereas we had 230 people coming from 29 different countries. So the process of that is just quite daunting. And the IPL had the same thing. So you were saying how the IPL followed immediately on. As we landed, so there was two ways in and out of CPL this year. You either went into Barbados or into St. Lucia and then on to Trinidad. So we organised the charter jets from each of those places because the borders into Trinidad were closed. You couldn't just fly into Trinidad. So we had all the guys. Basically, the way it worked is if you were coming from Australia, New Zealand, etc., you came through St. Lucia and through the United States. And if you were coming from anywhere east of the Caribbean, you came through London, Barbados, and on you go, right? So, but the guys who were going from CPL to IPL were on our charter plane into Barbados, rushed through immigration, and then got on a plane to go to London, to get on a plane to go to Dubai. So, your Rashid Khan and Nicholas Poran and Danny Morrison and Ian Bishop were all rushing through Barbados airport to make sure they didn't miss their London flight because it was tight. But yeah, I mean, the IPL did an amazing job as well. I think, even more impressive, really, if you think of all the people that are involved in that coming in, and obviously the scale of the IPL is so much bigger than any other 2020 tournament. It's amazing. I mean, I was very jealous when I was looking at the Mumbai Indians rec room. I was like, wow, that's just ridiculous. I mean, we were very lucky. We had a ping pong table and a pool table, but it wasn't quite that level of stuff, right? So, but yeah, no, it's serious endeavor, and I think now with cases being even higher, with us being in flu season, it's even more difficult. And anybody who's involved in cricket logistics pulling it off just needs to be. I didn't have anything to do with the logistics and organisation of it. I just got a plane ticket and was told to go, and obviously lots of rules to follow. But those guys, I mean, just hats off. It's just amazing. The fact that they've been able to have international tours in the middle of a pandemic is just something that all cricket fans should just be really grateful for.
of course, 100%. Okay, so what are your thoughts about T20 cricket comparison to IPL, BBL, and Blast in UK? I know you touched upon IPL, but where is CPL going in the next 5-10 years?
I think CPL's just continued to grow over the 8 years that it's been there, and I think it's something that everyone who's involved just really proud of. It has a very unique place in the cricketing calendar, right? It has a real USP to it, yeah. So when you're watching a CPL game, it could only be a CPL game. There's a friend of mine who did the match reports for me in 2018. Obviously, I couldn't do it anymore because I was then doing a different role. And he was just there going, it's not like any other cricket I've ever watched. It's just crazy. It's just the dancing girls, the people pieing in the crowd, and I think the tournament doesn't take itself too seriously while at the same time being really high quality cricket. And I think it's done a really good job of kind of sitting between those two things of fun and very serious sport. So yeah, I mean, I'd like to think CPL sits there, in the very top of second tier of T20 tournaments. The top tier is the IPL. There isn't any doubt about that. The IPL is something else. It's a phenom. Love it. I'll wait for it with like, watch it all. Although it's a bit weirder this year coming straight back from CPL and then sitting and watching it. I mean, I had 2 weeks quarantine when I got back, so I just watched IPL for the whole time. But yeah, it's I'd like to think that's where CPL sits. But I think, T20 cricket's been amazing for the sport, and there was something you said in your intro just in terms of what it's meant for Caribbean cricket. There's lots of guys who've made a very serious living out of cricket who wouldn't necessarily have been able to do that if this format of the game didn't exist. And for that reason, it's fantastic. And as well, I kind of like to think of T20 as a bit of a gateway drug into the sport. You start watching 2020, it's like, oh, that's quite cool. And then an ODI or a test match comes on and you're like, oh, that's great. I don't know. I get joked about internally at CPL. I'm such a cricket dweeb, right? That they always talk about how I'm not the target market for stuff, right? I'm not the casual fan. I'm the person who'll be there talking to you about, how Josh Philippe's done in the Big Bash. I'm kind of, I've yeah. But yeah, I think the format's been fantastic, and I think the fact that it hasn't changed pretty much since it started. You're getting a few innovations now, aren't you, with the Big Bash, with the moving around of the power play and stuff. But I think the fact that it basically hasn't changed in the 17 years that it's existed kind of shows what a successful format is. And I think the success stems from the fact that it's still a game of cricket, but it's different enough from that it's accessible for your casual fans. So yeah, really looking forward to it. And I'm looking forward to the 100 next year. I think the 100 should be good. If you look around the world at franchise T20 tournaments, and in essence, that's what the 100 is, right? It's a franchise T20 tournament with 5 ball overs. And we can't be traditionalist about 2020, bearing in mind that at some point there's been test matches played with 4, 5, 6, and 8 ball overs. It's kind of a bit mad to be traditionalist about a format that's only been around for 17 years.
Yeah.
But anywhere you've looked around the world where you've had the best T20 players, home and abroad, playing together in a limited number of teams in a short format tournament across 6-7 weeks, it's been a massive success. That's just fact, right? If you have a 6 to 8 week long tournament with the best players in the world, you have a fantastic product. And that's what the 100 is going to be. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope, as someone who lives in the UK, I hope there's even more people that get into cricket. The more people that are into cricket, the better for me, as far as I'm concerned.
Sure. I mean, the way you're explaining CPL is you kind of we love to watch CPL live in Caribbean, right? So we kind of look forward to kind of visit the Caribbean at some point of time to kind of feel that ambience in the typical West Indian stadiums, right? So I mean, I'm sure CPL has played a big role in West Indies cricket at T20 level. It gave opportunity for many domestic players within Windies to kind of participate at on a wider stage, right? And I'm sure there are a lot of mixed thoughts and opinions from West Indies greats about the CPL existence and how much of CPL is helping the Test cricket to kind of boom to the extent they are preferring to, right? So any views on that? As in, have you kind of analyzed anything on that front?
Yeah, I mean, CPL is a bit different, I think, from lots of other 2020 tournaments around the world. And I think it's important to understand that CPL has bought the rights to run 2020 cricket in the Caribbean. So it's not Cricket West Indies that run it, although we work very closely with Cricket West Indies. I think by and large, CPL's viewed very positively by everyone across the Caribbean. I think it's definitely, I think you'd be safe to say it's probably the largest entertainment product in the region. And you get very few people that are anti the league 8 years in. What it's doing in terms of developing Test cricketers, I mean, that's kind of not really the job of a 2020 league, is it? It's kind of, that's just part of what cricket does. And cricket's hugely lucky to have 3 formats of the game that people want to watch, right? If you look at golf, and golf is trying to come up with a 2020. I mean, that's the thing, is that other sports are looking at it and they're thinking, God, wouldn't it be great if we had something that was our sport, but as condensed and as congested as that. But at the same time, CPL's worked really hard to help develop young Caribbean talent. So every squad has a minimum of 2 under-23 players. Those players come from a pool that's selected by the Cricket West Indies developmental team. And that list is sent to the teams ahead of the draft, and the teams have to pick 2 of those players for their squad. On top of that, they have to have a minimum of 10 appearances across the tournament. Now, that could be 5 and 5, 3 and 7, 10 for one guy, but across the tournament, those guys have to play 10 matches. So the leagues work really hard with Cricket West Indies to develop young players, because it would be hugely short-sighted for any league to not want to develop young players. Chris Gayle's not going to be around forever, right? So who's the next Chris Gayle? Personally, I think the next Chris Gale is Nicholas Pooran. I think he's going to be just unbelievably good for the next 15 years. But you'd kind of need to be thinking, right, okay, who's the next Sunil Narine? Who's the next Kyron Pollard? Yeah, you constantly need to be developing talent. And I think that's where anywhere in the world just has to be hugely jealous of the talent that's being generated by India at the moment, because there's so many kids that are playing, and the more kids that are playing, the more crazy good players that you have. We've seen Siraj in this test match, in this test series just gone, and he's just kind of turned up and gone, yeah, test cricket's easy, mate, simple. Right. So I think, that's kind of where I think CPL needs to sit, right? Is it needs to make sure that it's playing its part 2 ways. One, it needs to play its part in giving monetary opportunities to these guys so you don't lose them to the sport. And 2, it needs to make sure that it's playing its part in developing the next level of Caribbean players. But if you think, CPL started in 2013, right? And if you think some of the guys that have blossomed at CPL and have become worldwide superstars at CPL, obviously you've got the likes of Chris Gayle, Darren Sammy, Dwayne Bravo. But Andre Russell started playing his 2020 cricket at the CPL, right? And then you look at guys like Nicholas Pooran, Carlos Brathwaite, Sunil Narine to a certain extent, although he was kind of slightly more established when it kicked off, but kind of he's blossomed through it. There's lots of guys, Chemo Paul. If you think there's lots of guys who have kind of, cut their teeth at CPL, and that's kind of a really important role for the league. And I think we're all, I'm always, and I think everyone within the organisation is really excited when you see a young guy doing well, There was a couple of young Guyanese players who we were really impressed with, Kevin Sinclair and Ashmead Ned for Guyana this year. Both just like, Kevin Sinclair especially just kind of turned up at the CPL, biggest cricket tournament he's ever played in, and was like, yeah, cool. That's where I'm supposed to be. Doing 3 flips. Did you see him do those flips? I don't know if you saw that on social. It was unbelievable. And then Ashmead as well just turned up and just absolutely bossed it from ball 1. So, there's Keon Harding, who has done really well. Jaden Seals, young Trinidadian fast bowler. I think there's just so much talent in the Caribbean, for a region that's 7 million people. It's just crazy. And I think I'm really hopeful that this next generation of Caribbean players, as they start becoming successful, will have the success at T20 that the other players did. And I think there's lots of times, these tours they've gone on recently to England and New Zealand are tough, right? It's tough going overseas anyway. But in this climate, with these bubbles, it's so tough. You don't get to go anywhere or do anything. So I think, they've been holding their own. They've been winning test matches against England. I think, I think the signs are positive for Caribbean cricket. And, I'm really proud of the fact that I get to be involved in it.
Yeah, I think
to hear
about the celebrations, Kevin Sinclair or Sheldon Cottrell. I think that's what makes the tournament so colorful, and these players, even when they come into IPL, they bring in so much color and character. It is absolutely amazing seeing CPL.
Yeah, that's the thing. If you look at, it's just great. It's fantastic. Like the St. Lucia Zoots with their hitting their thigh celebration and all the rest of it. I think when you watch cricket played in the Caribbean, it's played with a lot of joy, right? And I think that's something that's just really infectious. I spend a lot of time watching the cricket just smiling. And I was still smiling. Like, this year was weird, right? Because I mean, we had the crowd noise piped in on the TV footage. But as someone who went to all of the games, was at all 33 games, and I'm there in these, like Brian Lara Cricket Academy down south in Trinidad is a big stadium, you know, it's 16, 17,000 seats, which for a Caribbean stadium is massive. You know, that's the same size as, you know, most cricket stadiums in the UK. It's only really Lords and the Oval that are bigger. And it did feel strange being able to hear Chris Green shouting encouragement to his bowler, or, you know, someone getting hit for six and you just hearing them scream that they're annoyed, you know, and all the rest of it. That did feel odd because you're not used to that at the Caribbean, in the Caribbean, right? Because normally it's so noisy and so loud and so crazy. But it did feel like I felt quite honoured. Like I spent a fair bit of time. I'd go out, the little office we had overlooking the cricket at Brian Lara was at the far end of the ground. And there was like a whole, you know, normally it would be the VIP area, but we were given it because obviously no one could go on the ground. And there was just a whole load of empty seats in front of that area. And I spent quite a lot of time just sat out there just watching the cricket. And it was, you know, it was kind of a bit of a privilege really to be one of very few people that actually got to sit and watch it. So.